In the dead of night, when the moon is high and ill winds blow, and the banshees cry and the moonlight casts an unearthly glow, arise, my love, with tales of woe.
Good evening. It is 12 midnight, the paranormal hour. Welcome to Ghost to Ghost. I'm your host, Chief Lawson. Ghost to Ghost is a podcast to discuss all paranormal and parapsychology subjects. You can find Ghost to Ghost on all major formats, so tell your friends, tell your family. Come listen to Ghost to Ghost. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Our subject for tonight, the ghost of Diamond Chain, and maybe that of the Indy 11 Stadium. Who knows? Does someone say curse? Tonight's guest introduction, we have Jennifer Verne, our research manager, and Heather Lawson, our trainer on spirit.
Hello.
And as we look through this subject matter for today, I want you to know I'm very excited about this. This was a lot of fun to work on, and actually this is one that I did a lot of research myself on. Normally, Jennifer Verne, our research manager and our podcast producer, does a lot of the stories and so forth, and certainly does a lot of the ghosts of the day. And Heather helps with the taping of this and so forth. But this is one I worked on. I had some personal connection to, so I'm very excited about it. We are continuing our Haunted Locations series with this, and again, it's the location of Diamond Chain, and most people probably have driven by it south of Lucas Oil Stadium, and most people know today that it's being repurposed, if you will. They are tearing down Diamond Chain, closed a few years back, and Diamond Chain, first of all, it's located at 402 Kentucky Avenue. It's part of a much bigger area plot, but I will say that when I was there, and I didn't work for Diamond Chain, but I was contracted to come in and teach CPR. So when that happened, one thing I can tell you is a lot of the workers had a ton of stories to tell me about ghostly happenings throughout the plant. It was an older plant where it's multi-level. Today, most manufacturing facilities, especially in the automotive industry, are one level. You rarely have two levels. This was like 4 or 5 levels, and it was one of the older manufacturing plants in Indiana. We'll start at the beginning. The ground where the now closed Diamond Chain sits in Indianapolis was actually Indianapolis's first public cemetery. It was made up of 4 cemeteries put together. The cemetery is called the Green Lawn Cemetery. It's built in 1821. It housed over 1,100 pioneer graves. It also contained 1,600 at the time Confederate POWs and 1,200 Union soldiers. Separate area for black citizens, which really wasn't well recorded, which was natural at that time, unfortunately. It included Alexander Ralston, our town planner and designer of Indianapolis, Noah Noble, 5th, and James Wickham, the 8th governors, and both were also U.S. senators from our state. Caleb Blood Smith, U.S. representative, was buried there, and he was also Secretary of the Interior and a U.S. district judge. The new burials were banned starting in 1890, give or take. This poor cemetery has so many problems over the years, or had so many problems. While performing some of the earliest removals out of this cemetery, they discovered a lot of things, and one of the things they discovered was the fact that there was a lot of grave robbers, and doctors were buying up bodies for dissection. We had a medical school here. At the time, it was Indiana Medical College. I believe it was on either on Capitol or it was on, I can't remember the other street. I believe it was one on Capitol. And anyway, they would buy bodies.
Of course they were.
Yeah. And I tell you, one of the funniest stories I read when researching this was this one poor guy said, I buried my uncle twice in 1 week. We buried him, and then 3 days later I got a call from the police that they felt that his body was stolen, and I had to go down to the medical school and identify him. Then we had to have him reburied. So, this ran pretty rampant during that period of time. Plat books were actually made of the cemetery. And at that time, there was a gentleman in charge of it. His name was Allard, and he was to keep track of all the burials and so forth. Once that got to the problem where there started to be a lot of burials that he was unaware of, there was some double burials in graves that he was unaware of. Again, the plats weren't well maintained as a result of this. Most of the black community at the time, they didn't even record them. They were put in paupers' graves, and they were not buried very well at all. Some people were buried as many as 3 deep, and they were trespassed on. These bodies were reburied. Sometimes they were bodies that were dug up, decided they couldn't be used by the medical, and they were instead of putting them back in the original grave, they were sometimes added to a different grave. Basically, many lots were trespassed on.
Oh, that place looks good enough.
Oh, yeah, exactly. We'll just stick him in this hole. That should be fine. The cemetery, unfortunately, was caught between the river and the rapid growth from manufacturing. It was surrounded by slaughterhouses. You can imagine what that smelled like. Your mom and dad come out to see your long-lost uncle or grandfather, and, yeah, you can hear the cows dying in the background, and that smell, that's got to be great. Coal and lumber yards were on another end, and then, of course, the railroads. It was a large railroad from the Vidalia Railroad. Had a turnhouse there, among other parts of their yard. So you had the noises of the trains and the banging, and so, yeah, it was a heck of a quiet place.
Makes for a great picnic setting.
Oh, yes. And so rapidly, the noise and industry kind of took over, and as a consequence, families began to exhume and rebury the bodies of their families. And the early pioneers were some they wanted to get out of there first. At this time, there was 2 big cemeteries. There's a real new one in town, and again, we're talking right around the 1890s, 1895, and that was Crown Hill, and then you had Holy Cross, and you also have Floral Park. The Floral Park and Holy Cross had been there for a while, but Crown Hill was fairly new on the block. Mass grave relocations began in the winter of 1912 when the city decided they need to move them out of there because of the problem. And the first 1,100 pioneers were reburied and ended later in the fall about 1931, but they were the first ones to go. So between 1912 and 1931, we had all these bodies being moved and reburied. The Confederate soldiers were moved during that period of time. 1,616 Confederate dead were moved to Crown Hill, and they have their own separate area there. There's actually, in Crown Hill, there's a separate area called the Green Lawn area in memory of the Green Lawn Cemetery. The problem began, and as me and Heather were talking about, what movie does this remind you of?
Poltergeist.
Yeah, because it's getting to be a poltergeist situation. In 1913, floods caused the headstones to be used as bric-a-brac, losing some grave sites. Now, most of these were small pauper stones that were the stones of a lot of the black family, but there was also other ones, so they were all piled down to recede the flood lines. Somebody thought that was a good idea, and unfortunately, those were removed from the grave, so they didn't know where those graves were at. To make things worse, after Mr. Allard died, the plat books showing the burial spots were entrusted to his wife, Mrs. Frances Allard. At some point, the city requested those books from him during the moving process, and Miss Allard quickly explained to him that those were her possession and that she would sell them at a reasonable cost.
Of course she did.
Yeah, and I think that, she saw a profit to be made. Yeah. Today, they would have ended up on eBay. But either way, this became an immediate problem because now they don't have any map. They're basically they're going to where the stones were at. One family said that basically how this worked was if you had the money and you were able to pay for your relatives to be exhumed and moved, they got moved. If you didn't have the money, they moved the stones, and that was it. Because the city paid a certain amount, but the people moving the bodies felt that was not enough, so they wanted more from the people there. The cemetery came under control of the Indianapolis Parks Board in 1896. By then, it was in neglected condition. The parks tried to renovate this. They erected an iron fence, refilled sunken graves with earth, removed dead trees, placed benches, and installed electric lights. Kept the grass mowed and planted trees. Citizens' resentment to the whole issue and the failure in the body moving and the way the city had acted really led Green Lawn being abandoned as a public park. Of course, nobody wanted to go sit on the benches and listen.
They tried to pretty it up at least.
Yeah, they did. They did, but still, you got the slaughterhouses, everything else. Nobody wants to sit in the middle of that. So, matter of fact, one section they even turned into a dog pound. And it just is what it is. I think that the problem got to be that, we're back into this poltergeist situation. You get a bunch of guys that are being paid, and hey, if they don't have to move the bodies, that's only half the work moving the stones. And so the stones got moved. We don't know how many bodies are not under the stones at, the 3 cemeteries they were moved to. No one really knows. And they obviously
They're probably
left.
still there.
Yeah, exactly. So underneath all this is unmarked graves that are still there, people that haven't got moved. I mean, the stones are now gone, half of them are washed out. Now, I was told, and I don't have verification for this, but I was told that they had some historical researchers that went out and dove into White River and found markers washed offshore, because as the shore eroded out, they found some of the markers that were used as brickbat. Although it doesn't appear that was ordered. It doesn't show up anywhere, which I'm sure it wouldn't, but it doesn't show up anywhere in history. So, in 1907, the Vidalia Railroad bought a small section of green lawn. It was a section least believed, and I think at this point we'd have to use the word believed to be unoccupied. They used
Hopefully.
that. Yeah, hopefully. Yeah, they several other acres were converted into a 25,000 seat baseball stadium called Federal League Park, which is kind of interesting considering they're wanting to build the Indy 11 there.
Right.
By 1914, the newly formed Federal League baseball team, the Indianapolis Hoosiers, moved into their new home. The Hoosiers won the Federal League pennant in 1913 and 1914. The Outlaw League competed against the National and American League teams until it folded in 1915. The ballpark closed in 1916 to make room for freight yards. So more train freight yards.
Right.
So, all right, now that brings us up to where this is at. So we've got this cemetery that's sitting out there, and people don't even know it's there. They've forgotten about it. Now, when they moved the graves, they did mark an area called Green Lawn area in Crown Hill to honor those people that came from Green Lawn. But there's also ones that are not buried in that area, specific area of Crown Hill. They're buried elsewhere. But the big thing is all these graves are still there. So in 1917, the Diamond Chain Company bought the property, okay, and they're going to build their building there. The Diamond Chain Company was actually formed from another company, but most everybody at the time they thought had been disinterred and relocated to other cemeteries. At least that's what they believed.
The bodies are just this.
Yeah. Get closer. Yeah, that's the thing. So, yeah, did you move the bodies or just the stones? And actually, we just watched Poltergeist last night before this broadcast.
Yeah.
Kids had never seen it, and they thought it was really a pretty cool movie.
Yeah, because this is not an uncommon practice.
No,
This
it is
happens
not.
all over the
And people would be
place.
surprised at how much it does happen.
Yes.
So the company was started in 1890 by Arthur C. Newby and partners Edward C. Fletcher and Glenn Howe. The company grew to provide bicycle chains on 60% of all bicycles sold in the United States. So, pretty much they were the big dog in town as far as bicycle chains. The company began with 4 machines and 4 workers. In 1896, Henry Ford purchased 10-foot of chain from the company. Ford used the chain on his first quadricycle, so that's one of their claims to fame. In 1903, the Wright brothers had the company design special chains which they used to make their historical first airplane flight at Kitty Hawk. So, they got a little history here.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's pretty nifty. During construction in 1917, they ran across old burial markers and bones. This is a good way to start right off the bat. Graves had not been moved. Bone fragments and intact human leg bone and headstones were unearthed then. Now, this is 1917. Okay. Turns out, and I think this is the way it is a lot of times in these matters, according to family stories, the families were told that their loved ones would be removed for a fee. For a fee. If the families could not pay for the exhumation, that's a word that's not going to work. Thank you. Exhumation and reburial. Then they just moved the headstones. And so that's the way it ended up, And again, as Jennifer pointed out, this happens more than you think. So,
Well, I think the biggest thing that some of our listeners might know of is Chessman Park in Denver, Colorado.
oh, yes.
Chessman Park is now haunted with lots of stories and encounters. And that used to be a public cemetery. And the guy that was hired to move all those was being hired by the coffin. So he would dismember the people and put them in more coffins, so
Oh,
that
yeah.
he was moving more coffins.
Yeah, and because they would move. Sometimes it would take 3 coffins to move one person. I remember reading the story about that, and oh my God, yeah. So you can imagine what this. Greed is a funny motivation. So, so basically, if the family could pay for it, they moved them. If not, they just moved the stone. So, again, ultimate true life poltergeist. So, 1947, a cast iron coffin of John Desmond is found when Diamond Chain decides to increase their size due to World War II, and coming out of that, there was more manufacturing needed. So they ran across this beautiful, beautiful casket. It's ornate. It's one of the at the time that was very popular in the early 1900s to late 1800s with these hermetically sealed lead coffins. They have viewing windows, and they could view in there. The body looked pristine, and they thought at first this might be a Confederate soldier because he was wearing uniforms. The brass buttons were still intact, and so the problem was, though, when they opened the coffin, immediately the body deteriorates, turns to dust within a matter of hours or less. So, and I think that that certainly is an issue, all the way around. But in this particular case, the body itself, they tried to get it reinterred, and his stone they found. The stone was in Crown Hill, but he wasn't. So, yeah, so there's part of it right there. Then body parts in 1967 were found as they started once again to expand Diamond Chain. And, in 1980, there was stones found, and then the big one was in 86. They found another casket. It was another lead casket, and when they hit it with a backhoe, and it opened the casket. It like a sardine can at the bottom. Well, they were able to view the body for a few hours, and within hours, the body had decomposed in the dust. But they did get a chance to look at it. In '99, there were 2 bodies found there. So they were digging up fiber optic cable, optics communication. This actually was near the sidewalk area, and it was, that's how far into the road that had, because Kentucky Avenue wasn't there then. The excavator again peeled back the coffin to reveal, just same as it did in 80. Expansion project at Diamond Chain has uncovered bones, casket remains, and headstones, and there's a newspaper article in the Indianapolis Star dated October 16, 1986. It's on page 54, and you will see a picture of that coffin. It's pretty interesting. I really thought that was pretty good all the way around. Now,
the picture was hung in the cafeteria at the Diamond Chain?
Yeah, they had these pictures, which I thought whoever thought that was a good idea.
That's what I want to see while I'm eating.
This is where I come into play because the gentleman who was the safety rep there, guy named Jeff Rinke, and he had came over from Ford Motor Company as an ergonomic safety rep there, and so he left. And as everyone knows, I was a fire chief at Ford. So anyway, long story short, Jeff calls one day and says, "Hey, I need a favor. I know you teach CPR. I need to get all my people in my fire brigade trained in CPR. Will you come over and teach?" I had no idea anything about Diamond Chain. So one of the captains that worked for me at the time says, "You're going to Diamond Chain?" He says, "The place is haunted, don't you?" He says, "You'll enjoy that." And I go, "What do you mean haunted?" He goes, "You don't know about that?" And I go, "No." So he knew just a little bit of what some people had told him that were machinists working there. They had some very strange happenings. So I go over and I'm lugging all my gear in. And this is I'm used to a factory being flat because most automobile manufacturers, modern, are really flat, open. They take up acres and acres of space and you drive around. Well, this one isn't that way. It has a lot of elevators and it's got multi-levels, and these levels are horribly reinforced for machinery. And, I was a little unique to this. So I'm in the elevator ranking. I look over at him and I said, "Hey," I said, "by the way, this place haunted?" He goes, "Well, there's a new one." He says, "Of all the vendors that come in, I usually don't get that question." He says, "Technically, yes." He says, "Don't talk about it around any of the stiffs." And that's all he told me. I said, "Stiffs?" He says, "Yeah, shirts and ties. We don't want to do that." Hang on just a minute here. So anyway, he told me.
Technically?
Yeah. technically. And, so he says, wait till we get back to my office and we'll talk about it. So we get back, and where his office is at, they're renovating. So I'm on like the 5th floor of the admin wing. And there's nothing there. In his office, it reminds me of WKRP's Les Nessman's office, It has partition walls. I looked at him, I said, and this is an improvement from Ford. He says, they pay me a lot more. I go, okay. And so we go in, and I go, where am I teaching at? He goes, well, it's going to be down around the corner. He says, it's down a bit, I'll take you down there. And he says, but look, the ghost thing is kind of sensitive. I said, okay. He says, a lot of guys talk about it. He said, there's pictures down in the cafeteria. He says, you got a while before you start. And I was teaching 3 or 4 different shifts. So they had people coming in at different times. I basically started teaching at like 5 o'clock. I taught till like 5 in the morning. So I was there for 12 hours. Perfect ample time. And so he goes, go down to the cafeteria for the evening meal. And he says, you'll take a look at the pictures on the wall. And he told me how to go to the elevator and go down. And I kind of started, getting my bearings. He took me over to where I was teaching. Where I was teaching had been a closed down engineering and drafting area, so there's nothing. It's just blank floor, asphalt tile, and this huge, huge room over in the corner. Everything else beyond that is dark and is used for storage, and there's file cabinets and stuff, and I'm out there all by myself with this, so you leave me there. I go,
in the nicest dark corner they could
find, yeah, quite accommodating. And so I leave out of that corner. I go back to his office. Of course, he's going home. So, he's done. He's doing 8 to 5 gig, and he's out of there. So all he needed was be certified, and he was going to come back in early that morning and hit the other class. I said, okay. So now I only did this once. I did this for like a month. So I every 2 days a week for a month to get all their people. So, it was a good paying gig as far as CPR instruction goes. So anyway, I went down to the cafeteria, and sure enough, there's these big frame portraits of this lead casket with a viewing window that they unearthed, and sitting actually still in the earth you can still see the bucket of the backhoe sitting there, the excavator, and they pulled it up, and there's other ones showing different tombstones and different things, and this is all showing all this, and it's kind of like, holy cow. And so, it was kind of interesting to see, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, why would you put these in the cafeteria? And I'm thinking, well, they couldn't put them up front because they don't want guests to see them.
Right.
But the workers all got a kick out of it. So anyway, I made it a point at the end of my classes to ask the students I had, hey, if anybody's got any ghost stories, if you got time, hang back. I'd love to hear them. And so anyway, when, of course, they all knew the story of Green Lawn. The bodies have been, not removed in some cases, just the headstone. And, the bodies have been disrespected. In some cases, there was pieces and parts, and it just was a mess. And that's what their general conception was. The biggest thing they told me is they had these wooden freight elevators that you got used to riding. They had nice elevators up front, but they kind of turned those off at night. So I had to use a lot of the wood freight elevators that everybody else used. That was what everybody was going up and down with. And so they would sometimes not go to the floor. They would intentionally skip the floor you were on. And so anyway, I'll never forget, I rode these by myself. And you get in, you put a couple safety doors down, and you hit the button. There's not a hell of a lot to them. And I got in, I hit the button to go to the 3rd floor, and this thing starts moving down. I'm thinking, oh, shit. And, I'm looking around going, well, I must be picking up somebody else, And so the thing goes to the basement. The basement has no lights on. And it's an area where I think they've got oil tanks and, things for machinery above, the larger pieces of machinery. But I'm down there, and I'm looking around, and it automatically opens the doors for you. I'm thinking, oh, no. And I'm reaching up, grabbing the doors, shutting them, going, nope. You need to learn to count, goddammit. And I reached over and hit the button. I go, I need to go 3. And, and it takes me back up.
Yeah, you're picking somebody else up, all right.
Yeah, and we get up to 3, and I'm thinking maybe I should stay at the cafeteria a little bit and get my, and I get up to 3, and I get off, and there's nobody there. And I got about 15-minute wait before my next class comes in. So, I'd already cleaned all the mannequins and everything I need to do. So I go back over, and I'm sitting there acting very calm. And all of a sudden, I could swear I hear somebody walking. I thought, oh, I got a student. I'll ask him about the basement. Well, they walked, and they came down to where they should have cleared the partition in the corner, and then they never came through. And I yelled out. I said, hey, come on back. The class is over here. We're over here. And nothing ever moved. So I thought, Okay. So I thought, well, I'm just going to walk over. Maybe it's somebody that's not taking a class. They're coming down. Because I know they have security, but I've not seen any of their security people. There wasn't one in the basement when I was there, I can tell you that. And so I'm waiting, and I walk around the corner, and there's nobody there. I'm over by where Jeff Rinke's desk is at in his cubicle, and there's nothing. And it goes down the hallway, and there's just nothing there. And I thought, well, maybe somebody snuck over to one of their cubicles. And I thought, well, that'd be great if there was a cubicle. But there's no cubicles. I mean, it's just, it's just open area, except for his little cubicle. And I think there was some stuff, maybe some cubicles. It's been a while back, but I think there was some south of there. I probably did this in like 2005, 2004, or something like that. So anyway, I thought, well, that's really odd. And so I sat down in Jeff's chair, figuring I'd wait to see if they walked past. Well, the next footsteps I heard was my students. They were starting to come in. I didn't think anything about it. So I asked one of them, I said, hey, I had this funny thing happen. I was on the elevator, and it took me to the basement area. And I said, and they go, well, there's a sub-basement. And they're telling me about all this. And they go, yeah, that's for storage and stuff. They said, it's a ghost. The elevators do it all the time. The ghost takes you down to that floor. And I go, any reason why? He says, well, there's a bunch of graves that they didn't move. He said, maybe they're taking you to the graves. I don't know. And that's what this guy was, a big old burly kind of, I think he was a millwright or machinist. And I go, good to know. I said, note to self, if you get in the basement. And he says, I get the hell back out of there pretty quick.
Basements are sunk into the ground, right?
Exactly. Makes sense. So that was my little experience.
Join us.
They told me that they had tools that would end up missing. They'd turn around, put something on a workbench, turn around to do something, then turn back to get it, and it'd be gone. I was told about all the voices and people yelling back and forth that weren't there, and how doors sometimes jiggled in the admin building. Now, of course, during daytime, they didn't seem to have a lot of this problem. It was more of the evening times that they would notice it. So, but the odd thing is, realistically, now this is becoming which I find interesting, is becoming Indy 11 Stadium. So,
and not just a stadium. There's a whole plaza coming in with shops, and it looks like condominiums, apartments, things like that.
Yeah, so I wonder how many bodies we're going to run across this time. And I'm not going to say this. I'm not accusing anybody, but I'm wondering if anything will get mentioned. There's a lot of contractors that will just pretend that nothing happens. And, there's one time, not directly related to this same subject matter, though. When I was on Warren Township Fire Department many, many years ago, they were building Station 43, which is on 10th Street, just before you get to between Midhofer and German Church. Well, a lot of people didn't know 10th Street didn't used to go all the way through there, and that used to be all part of Washington Park Cemetery. So when they were excavating that, and at the time there was two buildings going in, 41 Station and Rural Fire Dispatch. Apparently, now this was told to me. I didn't witness this because I wasn't on the department when they were building this station. The station was built by the time I come on. Fairly new at the time. But they hit a casket and brought it up. And it was, an unmarked burial. Now, a lot of people don't realize, but a lot of black citizens at that time were not afforded. They couldn't afford or were not allowed markers. So a lot of times they were buried in unmarked graves. And a lot of pauper graves were just simply graves. They gave them space to bury their dead, but they didn't put any marker on it. A lot of times a family member or something would construct a cross or something, keep it on there while they were alive. And so, those things eventually fade. So this was a lost grave. And I'll never forget it. The operator came off and refused to touch the backhoe, left the job, refused to come back. They had to go get another operator because there was no way in hell he was digging any more in that ground. And, we always kind of wondered, sitting out back of the station, how many more bodies are now. 41 Station still there. And guys, if you're on 41 Station, this is news for you. You may be sitting on a graveyard of unmarked graves. So,
surprise.
Yeah, surprise. You're welcome. But honestly, weird
Maybe
things.
Not surprised.
Well, there was a lot of things happening when I was there. They built a room. It was supposed to be a training room for the volunteer firefighters upstairs, and they had stuff happening left and right there. I mean, all kinds of things happening that were affected by that. Now, another instance of the same instance in Beech Grove, when the original Beech Grove's #1 station was built there, and I apologize, I don't have the number on top of my head for some reason, but it's right there off Churchman. When it was built, it's built right next to Pioneer Cemetery. There was some rumor for a long time that was never proven that there was some graves that were built underneath the firehouse when it was built. The firemen, when it was first built in the 70s, complained horribly of having apparatus doors shut when they stage apparatus, they stage it with doors open. Back then, the 70s, I don't know if they do as much now, but we used to leave the doors open. We put our gear so we could jump right into it. Wherever position you were riding, you put your bunkers there so you could step out, step in. It was quicker. And they would have the apparatus door closed for no particular reason. And these are heavy-duty pieces of equipment. It's like being in the military. If you've ever been in the military, you've operated any kind of military apparatus, the doors weigh. They don't close on their own. And you don't want to be in between them when they do. They're heavy. These things would close. They had a creeper that they were using to get underneath the engine to look at things, and it was leaned up against one wall. It fell down, slid underneath two engines to the other wall. They had numerous things going on there. That was, I don't know if they still are or not, but that was a big thing at the time. So, this, as Jennifer pointed out, and in Denver, there's there's a ton of cases of this.
Probably every single state has at least one case, if not multiple cases of this happening. And it is due to greed. People don't want to pay all the money to move and excavate all the bodies, so they just move the headstones. Or they take the money to move the body, but don't move the body. Just pocket the money. You
wonder how many of those happen, too. I mean, the funny thing was, Ralston, she was around, I think that was her name, Frances, hang on. Allred, yes. When her husband died, this was prior to them moving the cemetery. So they wanted to move the cemetery. And so they asked her for the plots so they could see where the graves were at. And she said, well, I'll give them to you for a price. And she told what they wanted. It was an exuberant amount. Basically, she was going to put them on, if they had eBay back then, it was going to go on eBay. Whoever the highest bidder got the plots. Well, the problem was the city wouldn't pay the money. They told her they were city records. She needed to turn them over, and she refused to do it. So they never moved the records. So again, they had no idea. They're shooting in the dark. They have no idea. Now, these plats supposedly were very, very well written. They would show where the unmarked graves were at, everything, but it never happened. And so as a result of that, all of these, plats just disappeared. So, one of the researchers for the Indiana Historical Society went back, I don't believe she worked for the Indiana Historical Society. Let me rephrase that. I think she was an independent investigator, but she went back and contacted this woman's family and said, hey, do you know if you have access, are these plats still in your possession that show all this area? And of course they said, we don't even know what they look like. We have no clue. That was several generations removed, and some of that more closer relatives had passed away, and a lot of that stuff had been distributed. They said it's quite possible it could have been in her belongings, but we don't know where they're at.
Right.
And so, but yeah, that was certainly part of it. Had they had that information, I think it would have been a lot easier to do this. But let's think for a second. If they build the Indy 11 diamond there, or I don't guess they call it diamond soccer field.
It's a pitch.
Yeah, it was a pitch. Okay.
Pitch.
I'm not familiar enough with sports. I'm not a sports fanatic unless it's golf or curling. So, yeah, I don't have terms good. So, anyway, if they put the pitch up there and they put the shops and the other things, how much is that going to affect? I mean, one, are we going to find bones? Are we going to find graves as they dig? And two, if they do, are they going to mention it? I look for some newspaper articles on this.
Somebody will mention it.
Yeah, it may be. Now, I tell you what, you get some union guys, they'll mention it in a big way because they're going to get off the equipment and go, we ain't touching shit until we get a union rep out here. And I mean, I've seen this in action. Yeah, and most people have some little bit of, whether they want to admit to it or not, some little bit of skepticistic superstition.
Superstitions, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that, a lot of people make you wonder.
Whether it's officially mentioned or not, somebody will.
Yeah, exactly. So if we take it a little further and say, and I'm going to rely on this to you and Jennifer and Heather, because you may know baseball better than I do. There was a big curse. Was it the Yankees or the White Sox that had it? They didn't win a pennant for so many years due to
I think that was the Red Sox.
Red
the curse
Sox.
of the Bambino with the goat,
yes.
that whole thing.
Yeah.
Yes.
So question is does this, Indy 11. Well, this caused them problems. It obviously didn't the Indiana Hoosiers that played in the Outlaw League. I mean, they won 2 pennants.
Very true.
But, they hadn't moved all the graves or attempted to move all the graves and really got into that mess at that point. So, if you look at it and you go back and look at the old plats, it's interesting because really a lot of that area there's still train yards there, not near as many as there were. There was actually a roundhouse there at one point, and I think it's where Lucas Oil Stadium now is. That was the roundhouse. It was 2 big roundhouses that could move trains.
Okay.
I got to admit, I don't do a lot of research anymore. Jennifer handles all the but it was fun. This was a lot of fun digging around, horsing around. Now, I didn't get to use all the resources we actually had because I was sick, but I didn't get on the newspapers.com and some of the others to search all this down. But what I did do was just pretty fascinating, and I tried to find a Facebook page from Diamond Chain because I'd like to hear from some of those people. I really wanted to know what they knew about, see if I could get any more stories. And so if you're a former employee of Diamond Chain and you've got a story and you'd like to get it out there, send us an email, info@spiritindiana.com. We'd love to hear from you, and maybe we can work it into the show or onto the Facebook page. But I think it's pretty cool all in all. The history on this is just, it's incredible when you break it down. So
History is always fascinating.
Oh, yes. I really, I got to admit, I really enjoyed doing this. So it was a lot of fun. But I do think that, we'll get some calls. Of course, I said the same thing when they got rid of Central State and put the condos up. I still haven't got any calls from there.
We still haven't heard anything from them.
No, every time I go over their west side for anything, I have to be over near there. I keep thinking, how in the hell is this working out? I remember
Are they threatening them not to say anything or what?
Well, again, they may not want to lower the those are independent. I think those are kind of like condos. I think they own the property, so they may not want to. The odd thing is the old athletic club
brings something. They're like, no, we don't talk about that here.
Well, it.
We don't talk about Bruno.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. The funny thing at Ford is they didn't give a shit. You talk about anything you want. Yeah,
To vouch the coffee shop.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I can always say I enjoy about Ford was they had no couth as far as, or any secrets in that level. Now, they would keep stupid shit secret. You can talk about ghosts and curses, and, I can tell you a ton of funny stories, and I thought about doing one on the Ford plant, because they always said the Ford plant was haunted. We had so many people that died there, and the only rule that Ford had was no one dies on the property. If we work on them, you don't call them, which we couldn't do anyway, but you have to get them off the property. They need to die somewhere else. But there was a few people that managed to beat Ford on this one. We had a gentleman who shot himself in the back parking lot, and he shot himself in a way that we couldn't do CPR. So that wasn't. He was dead. And so we had a few others, but it was always entertaining to see what kind of thing was going to happen. But we had a lot of people that died some pretty bad deaths, or deaths resulting from something that happened at the plant that they never could prove. That the Ford made sure of that. But I think a lot of people, they wanted to make sure they got them out of there, so nobody died on the facility. But I'll tell you what, honestly, with all the industry out there, there's a lot of stories that are suppressed. I'm sure we never get. If you think about it.
Very true.
Yeah, I mean, I was told the airport from the old Ware Cook original airport grounds have been haunted. I've heard, because a couple of the guys that were doing, working with the Department of Homeland Security was using the old building before it was tore down for different kinds of scenarios and stuff to do with law enforcement. They said they had all kinds of weird things. So you never really know. So, but, so again, if you're with Diamond Chain and you were an employee there in Indianapolis, reach out to us. We'd love to hear what you've got to say. So, well, that's pretty much all I have this evening, and we're going to get ready to wrap this up. So, in conclusion, I want to say thank you for listening to Ghost to Ghost. Well, that concludes Ghost to Ghost for tonight. I hope everyone has a good evening, and on behalf of myself and
me, Heather,
and Jennifer,
good night. Thank you, everyone. All right, listeners, welcome to Ghost Story of the Day. Today's presenter will be Jennifer Verne, our research manager on Spirit.
Ghost Story of the Day. The Hockey Hall of Fame in Toronto is located in the former home of the Bank of Montreal. It was moved there in 1992 and is haunted by 19-year-old Dorothy, a former employee of the bank, who was very well loved and liked by customers and coworkers alike. She was in an affair with a married man who happened to be the bank manager and sadly took her own life at the bank. So it's not unheard of that she would be the one haunting this favorite spot of hers. Over the years, the employees and customers of the Hall of Fame have attributed odd phenomenon to Dorothy. Lights turn off and on, doors lock and open by themselves when no one is around. People working the building late at night have heard footsteps, and many have heard moaning and screams. One worker set up an event witnessed by a chair spinning around until it moved right into his hand. While performing an event at the building, a harpist, Joanna Jordan, actually saw Dorothy's ghost move along the second floor ceiling. When she was invited to play there again, Jordan refused the venture. So attached was Dorothy to the old bank that she remains there even today, even though the hockey fans and memorabilia have taken over. One boy has been said to witness Dorothy's apparition in the hallway. He screamed after getting a glimpse of a woman with long dark hair gliding back and forth through the halls. Is there a penalty for that?
Thanks for listening to Ghost. Again, I'm your host, Chief Lawson. You can find Ghost on all major formats on the 15th and 30th of the month at midnight. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, maybe have a question or subject you'd like to ask about on air, or be used on the show, please email us at ghosttoghost@spiritindiana.com, ghosttoghost@spiritindiana.com. I want to thank my production staff on Spirit, Jennifer Verne, our research manager and our producer, and Heather Lawson, our trainer on Spirit and our podcast director, for helping make these podcasts possible. My chief of staff, Andrew Brooks, for his guidance and help on the scripts, and everyone else involved. Thank you so much. See you next time. Until then, stay safe and remember the truth is out there. Good night. Ghost to Ghost podcast and its contents is the property of Spirit Paranormal Ltd. All rights reserved. We welcome you to download and play the podcast and share with others for personal use. You may not, except with written permission, use or distribute its contents for commercial use. Spirit Indiana Paranormal, covering the Hoosier State since 2002, Indy's oldest parapsychology investigation group. If you're experiencing what you believe to be paranormal issues, reach out to us for help at www.spiritindiana.com or call our hotline at 317-883-9103. Again, that is www.spiritindiana.com or our hotline at 317-883-9103. Thank you for listening. Take care of yourself and the ones you love, and be safe out there.